evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
.3 Mahoning Drive-In Radio. Your old friend Virgil back once again with another amazing episode of the podcast. And for those of you guys that are new to the podcast, Mahoning Drive-In Radio pretty much is dedicated to shining a light on the drive-in culture and revival of the drive-in culture that us here at the Mahoning Drive-In care so much about. But now that our season is coming in for a landing, we get to have some off-season fun. And boy, oh boy, did we have some off-season fun. And before we get into things, I should say we have several guest hosts tonight. So say hello, everybody. We got Mark, we got Robert, we got Sandy, and we got Mama Beth.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Always great to have you guys. So we had an incredible experience over the weekend with what has become regularly an annual event for Exhumed Films with their 24-hour horror-thon. And Mark, do you want to explain a little bit on kind of the history of this event and how it's kind of come to be?
Sure. This is the 14th Exhumed Films 24-hour horror-thon. These were done for the past several instances at the iHouse in Philadelphia, which was Exhumed's home for all their film screenings. And what it is, it's, as it says, it's 24 hours of nonstop celluloid hitting a film screen. It is a show that sells out very quickly every year. I only ever went to the previous one that they did when they announced it might be their last ever because they were losing their venue, because they always happen to fall on either our closing weekend at the drive-in or our staff party. They always fell on a date that I couldn't make it because of my drive-in commitments. And what it is, it's feature after feature. They're all mystery movies. They don't tell you what you're going to see before you go in. They'll give you a list of clues, and then they make that in the form of a contest, or you get a ballot, and whoever guesses the most right wins a prize. And the screen never goes dark. So there's a few trailers usually, and then a feature. And as soon as the feature is over, it's really just like 3, maybe 4 trailers, just a few minutes, and then the next feature, it is a horror-thon. It's a mix of genres. Usually it's horror, sometimes it's a little sci-fi, sometimes it's a thriller. It can span anywhere from the 40s to the 90s or even early 2000s, and it just all draws from Exhumed's just vast film library, along with, you know, films they rent or borrow from other people. And the trailers kind of give you a little bit of a clue as to what you're about to see. It might feature an actor from the film you're about to see, or sort of same genre, same studio, or something like that. So it really keeps everybody guessing and playing the game, so to speak, right up until the moment that the title hits the screen and people applaud or Carl gets up and walks out.
And for the East Coasters, I mean, this event has become legendary. There are folks that have been talking about the 24-hour-thon for many, many years. Once the Mahoning got up on its feet with Exhumed, huge crossover crowd, and people would talk about how incredible this event was for a cinephile. And the lore for me of this thing is obviously a ton of 35 millimeter in a classic theater, but the mystery of it all, the idea of you're going to have a communal experience in a theater, which is so rare anymore, but have this mystery unveiled upon you for each film. And as you would expect with a house full of film nuts, each movie got roars of applause, perfect reactions. You know, it was, I mean, I always say it as far as this crossover with a religious feel, but it was like a religious experience going into this totally blind with high expectations and then having those expectations just toppled over.
And it's you know, it's an amazing experience. We're not putting the cart ahead of the horse here, but just talking up this thing. It's an amazing experience. It's an endurance, physical and mental endurance test, because it's all how they even say it in the ad. It's like the Chainsaw Massacre tagline: "Who will survive and what will be left of them?" It's do you make it all the way through? Do you take breaks? What's your game plan? How do you do it? What do you eat? Before I went to my first event, the last time they held this, people were giving me advice as though I literally was training for a marathon. They're like, you have to eat this and bring Pepto-Bismol and bring a little of that and drink a lot of water and get X number of hours of sleep every night the week before. It was crazy. It's very intimidating the way people talk about this who've survived it a few times. And it's very much a bonding experience when you come out the other end of this thing. So going into this, had anybody other than me here been to one of these before?
I have.
How many before this one had you gone to?
2.
So what were your experiences at the previous horror-thons before we get to this one?
I had not gotten proper amounts of sleep beforehand. Now, the first year, I somehow, despite that, managed to see 13 of the 14 movies, although a number of those I was going in and out of consciousness throughout. And then the second time I attended, I was very picky, choosy about what I saw, and I think I only watched 8 out of the 14 that year, or something in that region.
I think I was closer to that. The show that I went to, we had a hotel nearby. Val had gone once or twice before, and her plan was always pick a long stretch of the night and actually get a good night's sleep and then come back and do the rest of it. I was waiting to see, I was getting really tired, and they had in the clues, they had something about a Hong Kong movie coming up. And I'm a huge fan of Hong Kong movies. So I went back to the hotel and slept for a couple hours. But even then I was in and out for some of them because the I House was not known for its comfortable, spacious seating or its air conditioning or heating. So it wasn't the most comfortable place. And you could say that helps you stay awake. And it could also say that just makes it so uncomfortable. Your body is even more tired. So for Beth and Sandy, this was your first experience, and Virgil, going to a 24-hour horror-thon. And this was held at the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, which they're good friends of us. We put on the Blob remake double take show with them this season at the drive-in. And they are known internationally as the classic movie theater that is featured in the original Blob. And I had been to that theater once before to see a John Carpenter triple feature and just fell in love with the place. It's just classic old single screen theater with a balcony, a little brass Blob plaque, just gorgeous decor, and nice to see a theater that's part of, schlock movie history that really embraces that. So for those who hadn't been, what did you think going into this? What were your hopes and dreams and fears for the experience?
I wasn't sure what to expect. You hear 24-hour thon and you're like, this could be a lot of fun, and it's going to be very tiring. But I had a really good time. It was an experience.
Oh, hell yeah.
I would definitely do it again. It was a lot of fun.
Sandy?
I loved every minute of it. It took me until I'd say the 4th movie to get oh my gosh, the previews are giving me another hint on it took me that long, and I was so proud of myself. And I'm like, oh, I feel really silly now that I didn't pick up on that earlier. But I thought that the previews were fun. I thought the experience was fun. And I truly felt like, I think Virgil said religious experience. I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I felt like it was a bonding experience for all of us to do it together, and getting to spend time with Beth when she's not behind a grill and we can just talk about things, or Virgil actually sat down and Nancy came. And I really felt like that was the highlight for me, were the people that I was with. And I thought that really mattered, that you spent the time with other people that also loved movies as much as you did.
And that's a rarity for us with the Mahoning, is we almost never see each other off the lot. It's extremely rare because we all live so far away that, I mean, even to have dinner together in town is kind of rare, let alone, go an hour plus away and spend 25 hours in the same space.
Yeah, that was certainly the highlight of the weekend, or the 25 hours because of daylight savings time. The religious experience is, what we deliver at the Mahoning on a cinematic level. It's unique in that it's hyper focused, and you don't get that at cinemas anymore. You don't go there. And Dan, Harry's partner there, started out the show by saying, no cell phones. We will kick you out if you have a cell phone. If you're chatty, you're out of here. And to have a respectful audience kind of appease those simple rules that should be a no-brainer in any theater, it was truly communal, and we felt like we were in an audience of kind of like-minded folks, And going into it, the quote of the weekend, there was a fan that stopped me on the street when he saw us. And he's like, yeah, it's my first time. You know, we don't know how long we're going to make it. He said, you know, when I saw 24-hour-thon, I thought, well, that's ambitious. So it's like, I think everybody goes into it with how long can I make it? Some of our hardcore Mahoning fans were there, and they go in with the mentality of like, oh, we're not going to sleep. We are seeing every single piece of film that hits that screen. And for me, it was a necessity to get up after each film. You know what I mean? And stretch the legs and get some motion and break things up. Because if I had to stay in that seat for 25 hours, forget it.
At some point early on, I decided I was in it to win it. I'm like, I'm not going back to the room. I know there will invariably be a movie that I don't care as much about, or I've seen a lot, and I'll use that to sack out. Not that it's that easy to sleep in those seats. I mean, the Colonial was way more comfortable and to me, a much better venue than the iHouse was, just in terms of what it has to offer. But the seats are old movie theater seats. So it's the wooden arms and the back that's kind of like a little metal rim against your lower neck. So it was a little tricky, but there were a couple movies that I was just like, I think I'm just going to let myself go during this.
It's an endurance test. You know what I mean?
See the battle of the super monsters. 4 fantastic creature features on one big show. See Yog, monster from outer space. See Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. See the Thing with 2 heads. See Mothra, Godzilla, Rodan, and Manda in Destroy All Monsters. See the gigantic Monster Marathon. All 4 on one big show. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested.
Let's run down somebody, if you could, who from the Mahoning crew was there other than us?
We were squad deep. It was on my end, myself and Fancy. I know that we had Mama Beth and Jeff, Beth's Jeff. We had Dave Wirt. We had John was there.
Dave Wright was there.
Dave Wright was there. We had Jeffrey C. in the house. I mean, as far as, you know, our regulars, it was kind of endless, you know, as far as
Tina,
the folks. Jay. Yeah, the regular folks. It was, gosh, even looking over the balcony down, I was just like, well, we know all these people. Sheila Diego right in the front row, Mikey Gingold, like we said. So it was really an amazing event. And going into it, I really had no idea what to expect as far as like the wait time to get in, things like that. But Harry and the guys at Exhumed, they're pros. They've been doing this for so long. It was like a well-oiled machine. And before we kind of get into the event specifics, why don't we go into Robert's role in all this? It was kind of, I'll let you tell the story, but it was kind of dropped on him that they may need some help projecting for those 25 hours.
No, Harry first asked me if I would be interested in projecting for him during the season some months ago, but it was a little unclear for a while how much help the theater was going to need on the actual day. They told me in an email, and I believe this was Scott, who I believe is general manager. He's been with the Colonial since they reopened, which I believe was sometime in the late 90s, although don't quote me on that. And he initially said sometime between midnight and noon for 2 to 4 hours. I ended up working for 8.5 hours. Scott had been doing pretty much everything on his own prior to that time. I jumped in around 3 a.m., I believe. I watched 7 movies. I was in the audience for the first 9, and then I helped with projecting the last 6. And it was a lot of fun. And given that I don't think it would be possible for me to watch all the movies, let alone enjoy them all over the course of 24 or 25 hours, it was probably the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it was. The presentation was beautiful on both your guys' end. I got to ask, because, you know, the booth is all the way at the top of the balcony, and certainly a different type of setup than what the Mahoning has. What was it like kind of projecting on a downward angle? I say that because, you know, the projection booth is super high up on the balcony and the screen is on the lower level, very bottom floor.
It was weird adjusting to the tilt. Now, granted, everything is on, you know, regular footing, except for that the projectors are pointed at about a 45-degree angle down. So I had to learn how to kind of lean in a way that I'm not used to while doing what I'm used to doing, because relative to the projection booth at the Mahoning, it's pretty much the same. It's a more modern style of projector that they have. There's little things that are different here and there. I got pinched a couple times on some of the gears in those machines. You have to learn how to handle them just a little differently. And I'm still a novice. I'm looking forward to working there again and learning more, because it was kind of fly by the seat of your pants. I had never encountered those machines until the day beforehand. I went in on Friday and practiced for a few hours and just crossed my fingers that everything would go well, and everything did.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And to think that you, like, I kept peeking over and seeing you in the audience, and I'm like, there's no way he's going to stay here, then jump up in the booth. That's just crazy. And it's a good time to bring it up, but every single person that passed in front of us, Beth will tell you, that was wearing glasses, I'd say, is that Robert?
Like, no, that's the guy who's sleeping in the seat in front of us. And he goes, why does everybody look like that?
I was really on the hunt for you that night.
But he really did look like Robert. He did.
It's true. It was very strange. There were a couple.
And there was another guy that looked like Rob too.
Yeah,
there
was strange. So we talked about it before we started recording, in the fashion of 24-hour-thon, in that the films are not openly promoted. Before the films play, they make the statement of, please don't share this out publicly. That being said, we're going to beat around the bush with the titles as we go through. But Robert hit it on the nose. If you guys want to know what was played, it's not difficult to find out. So we'll just leave it at that and jump into things. Why don't we talk about the pre-show fun that they had, Mark, which I've never experienced, but the Guess the Titles contest that they had, and also, I guess they'd call them like door prizes, because everybody, as soon as they came in, had a chance to win.
Yeah, Dan Fraga of Exhumed he's a wonderful host. Every Exhumed show I've ever been to, he's the host. If you've been to the Mahoning for an Exhumed event, Dan doesn't really do a lot in terms of hosting at the Exhumed shows at the Mahoning, except for Camp Blood. Dan is the guy who's dressed up like Morty from Meatballs. He's sort of your head camp counselor and organizes the games and things like that. So if you've seen that guy, that's Dan. So he gets up on stage, he welcomes everybody, he reads the rules, he's very funny. And when we were standing in line, so people started lining up somewhere around 6 or 7 a.m. to get a good seat. And that's traditional for these 24-hour shows. So there was a long line of people all the way down the block. And while people were waiting in line, people from Exhumed came and gave you your ballots. It's a big, long strip of paper. And they also gave you your program, which had really cool artwork on the front. And it opened up and it had the rules and it had past films that had been shown. And it had this list of clues, which we'll read as we go along here. So part of the thing, you'd get a ballot and you could fill that out and you had to hand it in before the first movie started, and they would tally that up, and the people who got the most correct answers would win really cool prizes. But also everybody had a wristband that allowed them to come and go freely from the show. And on that wristband was a little number. And they would use the random number generator on Dan's phone to just call out numbers of people in the audience, and you would just win something. And there's a longtime friend and fan of this show that goes to a lot of regional horror conventions and gets really cool, like limited edition art posters and prints signed by the celebrities who are in the movies. So there was a lot of Tom Atkins represented, or as they called him, God Who Walks the Earth, Tom Atkins, I believe. Every time you mention Tom Atkins, there's a lot of Adrienne Barbeau. There was a lot of Tom Savini, stuff like that. So quickly they run through and they just have people run it out to you. If your number is called, you say, hey, that's me. And he runs it out, all kinds of prizes. And then they launch right into, I don't recall if I don't think we had trailers before the first feature.
No, went right into it.
And the clue is undisputed horror classic that somehow Exhumed Films has never previously shown. If you're like a historian of all these shows, or if you paid close attention, I think the program lists a lot of the movies they've shown. You try to figure it out based on that. I think a few people around me guessed this one correctly. We're not going to say what it is here, but we should probably discuss it. Had anybody not seen this film or not seen this version of the film before Saturday?
I had not seen this version of the film.
And did you know the film very well before this?
I would say relatively well. It's a
Okay.
classic. But like there were several moments where I said out loud, I'm like, I never saw that before. So I really felt like it was a real treat to see it on 35 millimeter.
That was the thing. I wondered, like, I knew the film fairly well, but I hadn't seen it in a long time. And I had seen this version in theaters when it came out. And I had a hard time separating, what was different about this. I had to actually go and look it up later. But to me, this is literally one of the scariest movies ever made. And it just has that vibe through it that it feels a little kind of real. And despite being made decades ago, a little bit before I was born, it still totally lands to me.
I had never seen this movie before. I had never watched this movie.
Perfect.
Really? Wow.
I had never watched it. I had seen parts of it, but I had never sat and watched the whole thing before.
Highlight of the event for me. I mean, not just the opportunity to see this film on 35 millimeter, but the cinematic experience of it all. The darkened theater, everybody in it to win it, everybody fresh, movie number one. And it was so Harry, you know what I mean? Like coming out swinging, you know what I mean? And we knew from that moment on, like, boy, this is going to be a trip, But yeah, you are right, Mark. It lands. That movie holds up and will hold up forever.
How did it work for you, Beth, seeing it for the first time? I mean, had you seen bits and pieces of it before? This is like one of the iconic horror movies.
Yeah, I had seen bits and pieces of it. I think there were some things that just kind of flipped me out. So when I saw the title come up, I was like, oh no. I actually really, really enjoyed it. It's very atmospheric, has a lot of symbolism in it. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I think if you're going to see it, that was the way to see it, especially for the first time. Definitely the way to see it.
Definitely.
I would like to add in that this was the only movie in the entire marathon that I'd already seen.
Wow.
Harry was really good about that too. And I knew going into it, he had hinted at a couple things, but I knew he was digging really deep. He wasn't trying to give people a night of blockbusters, a night of on-the-nose horror titles. This was really trying to appease almost every fan that there is. And we got, as you guys will see, a little taste of everything.
And personally, that's what I like with the Exhumed shows is he digs up movies I've flat out never seen or are old enough that I never would have had the chance to see it in the theater unless he was showing it to me. I know there are people who, and this is probably going to be an exercise in frustration, anybody listening to the next hour plus of us just talking around what these movies are, but this is a movie, this first film that I've heard people say they don't like, they don't think it's scary, they think it's funny. And it has very heavy religious connections to it. And I never know if people are very not religious, if it doesn't land as well. I mean, I'm not, but I just think the movie is so disturbing and creepy. It works really well. But I've heard younger people say they thought it was funny. And I just don't get that. And nobody there seemed to react that way to it that I heard in the theater.
I think there were some giggles here and there. I think there's some areas that are a little funny that you could kind of laugh at. And sitting next to Virgil during the movie was just, I can't.
My dad would always pull, and we might have talked about this on the podcast, Mark, at one point, but my dad would always, to freak me out, because he knows that movie would freak me out, he'd turn to me and go, Demi, why you do this? Not to give away I guess that gives it away.
It does give it away.
Yes,
I think
It's the seventh sign with Demi Moore. Why was he calling you Demi Moore all the time?
I kept quoting a certain line from the movie over and over again, whether people wanted it or not.
I thoroughly enjoyed it and I laughed. So
And that's the way to start out Horror-thon. Like I said, we knew we were in good hands. We knew kind of how things were going to flow. And why don't we roll into it? Movie number 2.
And for all of our listeners, if you want to follow along while we avoid saying these titles, I'm looking at the Colonial Theater's Letterboxd page right now, and they have the entire marathon listed on their page. So it's quite easy to find these titles while we beat around the bush. Number 2 was, to my mind, just as strong as the first, and a real pleasure to see it on film. I'd already seen this movie. Of all the 15 that played, I had already seen 5 of them, and Just a really, really good mix. And I can say that without even having seen 7 of these movies. Projecting them, I wasn't able to watch them, but I can't wait to hunt them down and watch them on my own.
The official clue for movie number 2 was very, very specific, and it was easy to get this one. Incredibly influential Euro horror melodrama. Good luck.
Not since the cabinet of Dr. Caligari have critics been so enthusiastic. Never before have audiences been so terrified. Never again will you experience a tale of terror to compare with...
I had thought, based on that clue, that it might be Blood and Black Lace, the Mario Bava film. Somebody else in front of me, a friend Jordan, said it might be Bay of Blood, which influenced a lot of movies, but it was neither of those. It was a film that was from several years earlier, black and white, a French film. If you're a big fan of Billy Idol, think his early hits. He had a song based on this movie. One of the things we all do after the Horror-a-thon is, what was your favorite and your least favorite? And this might have been my favorite, just because I never thought I would see it on the big screen. And it has this weird, very quiet, black and white, kind of dreamlike vibe to it. It's got a character that wears this strange mask throughout the film. A mask that looks like an attractive person's face, but all the actress has to work with is her eyes. Oh, shit, I just said, I'll cut that out. I'll bleep the title, but not when I said shit. So yeah, had anybody else heard of or seen this film before?
Total new watch for me, and an amazing experience once again to get to see it with the Mahoning crew around me.
It was a new watch for me. I knew the song because I actually referenced it to Sandy, who was sitting behind me. And I enjoyed this movie a lot. I did. It was probably my favorite.
It's relatively slow, but fascinating. And that strange performance of this person with the mask throughout. And then it has some really gnarly surgery footage that you didn't think they would do that early in film.
That was the part that got me out of this whole thing, was that, the chalk outline first,
And
followed
how
by
slow
the
it
scalpel.
is.
Like, it was, I definitely thought, even in black and white, it was super creepy. It felt real. I mean, considering the special effects that they had back then, I thought that was like one of those moments where I couldn't even watch. I had to cover my eyes.
You kept thinking, well, they're going to cut away at this point, or they're not going to go that far. And
Yeah.
they do.
I kept thinking what an audience member back then must have felt and reacted. It must have just been like, oh my, how dare you?
And that movie was imported to the US. It played on a double bill with The Manster under an alternate title. And I think it might have been edited by a little, but US audiences did see that in English as part of a horror double feature back then. It's now seen as more of an art house horror respected kind of film, but it was sold as a down and dirty, scary horror movie back in the early 60s.
I would love to see that on a double.
And when the surgery's going on and they do that part, the whole crowd made this roar, like, oh, it was incredible.
That's the thing about the Horror-a-thon crowd too, is it's a respectful audience. Like, people will react. If something is funny, they'll laugh. If something really big happens, somebody will cheer, but they're not like Mystery Science Theatering it or being obnoxious or anything.
Yeah, it was really nice. Because like I said, even when I go to the regular theater, I hate to say it because, this is a podcast about the love of the cinematic experience, but 9 times out of 10, there's some sort of bullshit, you know what I mean? Where somebody's up and down, somebody's on their phone, I hate to say it, but even in our experience with the 25 hour-thon, there were 2 people sitting in front of us, 2 girls that, could not stay off of their phones, to the point where it was like, come on, like it really felt like a personal slap in the face with it being such a close hour community event,
Well, don't you know the best way to watch TV is while something else is playing after paying $65 for a ticket?
Yeah, I totally don't get that.
Yeah, who knows?
That's what some of our front row crowd and John, I believe, would refer to as a jabroni move.
Without a doubt.
Those were a couple
Thankfully-
jabronis.
Total
in a row there.
jabron.
Thankfully, Dan Fraga jumped in and helped deal with the situation. And having watched the second movie from the balcony, I sometimes I like to bounce around to different seats. It helps me with my stamina during the show, and it gets a different flavor for each movie. I sat in the very back, right by the projection booth. And when you're that far back, you can see when people are on their phones. And surprisingly, I didn't see people on their phones to take pictures of the title cards of the movie, which is something else that I just roll my eyes at for eternity. But they were on their phones throughout the movies, checking the time, texting, things like that. And even with a dim screen, it's very disrespectful. Thankfully, it didn't take away that much from the movie. But even during Blobfest, I've had to ask people to put their phones away. And I really hope that we can collectively push back against that. I hope that this doesn't dissuade anybody from coming to these shows. They're worth it, even with the jabroni, if you will.
Yes, jabronesque.
So movie number 3's clue was giant monster movie we screened one time a number of years ago, but it was for a relatively small crowd and under a different title. So it's kind of like we never have shown it at all. So that limits it to any giant monster movie ever.
He holds the front line of battle, while in their spaceships, aliens command a deadly duel. Will the powerful serpent Titanosaurus' cyclone tail and the robot monster Mechagodzilla's lethal rays destroy our Earth? See this ultimate test of power.
And what it was, we can say, right? We're not saying the titles. It was a Godzilla movie.
I mean, there's so many to pick from once you're under that umbrella, but I kind of knew that there was going to be a Big G appearance on this lineup. I didn't know what the title was going to be. Probably could have never guessed it with this title, but it's always a pleasure to see the Big G up on any screen. But this was the first time that I ever experienced some kaiju goodness with an audience that wasn't at the Mahoning. You know, I've never had a cinematic experience watching a Godzilla movie.
I grew up watching them on Saturday afternoon TV, where they were 16 millimeter prints that were horrifically panned and scanned. So for me, it was like getting a little piece of the childhood I never had, being able to see this, 70s. It's the 70s goofy kid skewed Godzilla. And it was a total blast. And the audience was really into it. They would cheer when Godzilla showed up. They would cheer and applaud when Godzilla would smack down another creature and best his opponent. And it was like being at one of these, I imagine, 70s kid matinees when these things used to play.
I think my favorite moment of the entire show from the audience perspective is that scene where Godzilla was buried by his nemesis. And when he gets out of the ground after he unearths himself and he brushes the dirt off his shoulders and kind of pumps his fists, that was sublime.
Yes. Awesome.
And that's having seen it before, but I'd forgotten that moment, and savoring it in real time. It's that alone was worth the price of admission.
I think this was the movie that I clapped the most during, like I was 7 years old again, because there would be moments where something adorable would happen and you're like, Godzilla's back, and you clap, and you just are so happy about it. And watching it with other people in a theater, I've never seen a Godzilla movie in a theater, and it wasn't until Mark said it that I realized that's true. I watched them at home with my mom and dad when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think we all were too young to have that experience. It was sporadically through the 60s and then big time through the 70s. But by the time the late 70s and 80s rolled around, it was local TV and then later home video. It's exceedingly rare to see any Godzilla that's not a brand new, American release on the big screen, because Toho has a very, very high rate they charge for you to be able to show their films. So most theaters they don't feel like it's worth it and they don't do it.
Yeah, I can say there were some amazing moments of laughter from the audience because, for those of you guys that are familiar with the Godzilla titles, there were just moments of kind of goofy, I don't want to say bad, but like goofy wigs and, funny looking characters and funny reactions and things like that. And they would just get uproarious laughter. And again, that's what I love about the kind of communal cinematic experiences. It's infectious. It makes the movie and the experience that much better.
And it was a nice change of pace. I mean, Harry and the Exhumed guys are experts at film programming, period. So you had that very disturbing, dark, quiet, slow, dreamlike Euro horror film. And then you have a Godzilla movie. It's like you just had a nice meal and then you had a giant hot fudge sundae for dessert with bubblegum.
Yeah, I can say going into it with Dan's intro, he did let us know that there were going to be 2 titles that were digital, but they were restorations. I believe one of the titles, we were the very first to see this restoration. So
I think that's the film we're about to talk about.
yeah, that was kind of a little segue as we steamroll into the next one.
This was a 4K restoration, DCP. This is a film that a well-known indie label, cult video label, is about to release. And we were treated to like the first, I think, public presentation of it. The clue for movie number 4 was underseen psychosexual thriller that was recently remade by a divisive horror filmmaker.
Donna and Jackson are every man's fantasy.
Hug you and kiss you. Love you, George. I want you so much.
I'm glad we knocked on your door, George. Oh, that music sounds wonderful.
But if you're not careful and you turn the sound way up, you could break a lot of glassware.
And one man's nightmare.
Wow!
When Donna and Jackson play, they go all the way.
It's a movie I'd never seen.
Me either.
I'd heard of it. I think I actually have the old big box X-Rental VHS that I picked up used at a video store years and years ago, but I just never got around to watching it. So I'd heard of it. Once it got a few minutes into it, I realized I had seen the remake. The remake features Keanu Reeves, and to put the cart in front of the horse, I actually think I like the remake better. The remake was from just a few years ago, and this is made in 1976. It's really only like 3 people in it. It's Seymour Cassel, who's known for a lot of movies, but Cassavetes stuff. It's Sandra Locke, who's known mostly for being in Clint Eastwood movies, and it's Colleen Camp, who's known now mostly as being the maid in Clue. For some reason, Cassel's voice is dubbed throughout the film, and that was really distracting to me because, I know what his voice sounds like, and that wasn't it. And it's just this film about these people who show up at this guy's house and manipulate him and torment him and drive him beyond the point of madness. I think I'm the only person who didn't like this movie. Like everybody else seemed this was like the highlight. Part of it was it looked fantastic. The restoration's great. There was a defining moment early in the film, and the score was perfectly appropriate for when the film was made. You know what I'm talking about. But now that piece of music is what you use when you're making a joke about a scene like that. So that was a little tricky. And the way the tormentors behaved over time became so beyond obnoxious to me, I just couldn't take it. When it gets to the end of the movie, the crowd erupted with a cheer that was louder and more sustained than I don't know if I've ever heard a cheer like that in a theater before. And I didn't know if they were cheering for these characters getting their comeuppance or because the movie was over. For me, it was because the movie was over. Now I'll step back and hear what you had to say about the film, which we will.
One of the greatest endings I've ever seen to a film. I'll start off by saying this movie rips, dude. It has so much going for it. I can agree with Mark. There were dated score moments where you're like, why?
And I generally love that kind of music. It's just that one scene where it's just like, oh, that's what you use now if you're making
totally. And I can see it. But for me, the takeaway was Colleen Camp's performance. She was incredible and kept reminding me of somebody the whole entire film, which I couldn't get out of my head. And I kept rolling through my head, where the hell do I know this woman from? For those of you guys that know Colleen Camp, she has a very distinctive smile. It's almost like a cocked down smile. And only later did Diego fill me in about Yvette in Clue, Miss Yvette in Clue. But for me, after I went on IMDb, she is Miss Vanderhoff in Wayne's World, which blew me away. I was like, that's totally what I know her from. But she's been in a million things. She's an incredible character actress and still crushes it to this day.
I figure I should chime in because everybody will hear the words Keanu Reeves and expect that I'm going to say something next. So I, of course, own the remake, and I felt watching the original that it gave me a lot to think about the remake. I'm kind of with Mark in that I feel like you see the certain scenes at the beginning that you go, yep, definitely I know what this is, because it's distinctive how it opens. But at the same time, I felt like the remake was definitely different in tone. Like the ending that you were just talking about, Virgil, is one of the best like it's an entirely different ending in the remake. Yeah. And I felt like both of them had a lot of good qualities, but I might have to say that, Keanu Reeves, I'll take the remake over the original, but definitely a good fun pick to watch with a crowd. I mean, that's the thing about all of the movies we've talked about, is that they were good crowd movies where when you go to the little brief time in between, everybody wants to talk about the movie you just watched.
Yeah. Great way to be exposed to a new title. I certainly would not have enjoyed that film as much if I were watching it in my bedroom. You know what I mean? There's just no way. It was a perfect kind of, especially if you don't know what's coming, film to have wash over you.
I wish I'd been able to see that one, but unfortunately there were limitations physically, and I had to step out during that movie. So I appreciated how much it brought the crowd down from the lobby, brought the house down rather, because the crowd just erupted at the end. I can't wait to see it.
And that rolls us into film number 5, which at this point, it's about not, the next film I think ends right around 9:00.
That's one of the things too during the Horathon. Like, I was seated downstairs. I wanted the screen to be as big as possible without having to look up, and I wanted as much legroom as possible in an aisle seat. So I wasn't really coming and going very much. I went out to go to the bathroom, and it's one of those things where you go out once, hey, it's daytime. You go out twice, hey, it's daytime. You go out again, wait, it's dark now, and because you're just looking at the screen the whole time for the most part. So unless you go out to get food or go to the bathroom, you don't really see when day becomes night and then night eventually becomes day again. The clue for film number 5 is cosmic horror sci-fi classic from the UK.
Who were they running from? What have they seen? Whom do they fear? There are 5 million answers to these questions, and every one of them is a shocker.
I had seen this one before, and it's one that I do enjoy, but it's not necessarily my cup of tea.
First time for me.
Did folks like it, dislike it?
But it was kind of slow. And by this point, I was kind of hungry. So I was like, can we just leave and get something to eat? I know it's terrible to say, but
no,
this could have been the movie I definitely probably could have skipped and not really worried about missing it, to be honest.
That's part of Horathon too, is deciding when you're going to sacrifice a movie so you can
and
get
it's
a meal.
nearly impossible.
And I think this one was on. I think this one was on me, wasn't it? Because I was the one that wanted to see this one.
Yes, we were initially going to go to dinner during this movie, and Sandy wanted to stick it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan. I mean, anybody that knows me knows I love the old black and white 1950s, where the girls are in beautiful clothes. And, it's just, I really thought I liked the first half of it much better than the second half of it. But in the beginning, when we were whispering about leaving, I was just like, no, I want to watch it. But yeah, we probably could have left to go get dinner at this point, too. I agree with that.
And you're looking at the clues as the program goes on, and you're like, oh, we can't miss that. That sounds incredible. And then you jump into something that you might not necessarily know, and you're like, oh, if I go, I might miss the best one. It's very hard.
This one was a Hammer movie, wasn't it? And I think that was one of the deciding factors, because it was Virgil and I, we were actually walking in from outside. We had taken a break. We were coming back in because, you can normally tell when the intermission ends because everybody rushes back into the theater. And we were standing at the door at the bottom part, not up at the balcony. And it came up and it put the title card up and it said, a Hammer production. And Virgil goes, I think we're staying for this one.
Yeah, this was a Hammer movie from 1967 that I remember seeing as a kid on TV. And I always thought it was a really, really cool concept where workers are digging a new railway tunnel and they find something. And what it becomes is much bigger than anybody expects it to be.
Yeah. Fun sci-fi movie. Definitely had some fun moments. And, the Hammer stuff in general, it's an acquired taste. The person that comes in wanting to see Scream may not be in love with the old Hammer horror goodness, but like I said, Harry went out of his way to appease a lot of fan bases. At least that's what I felt with this program. And within the first couple films, you get Big G, Hammer, huge blockbuster. So it's like he's a master.
Oh yeah. This is one that's the favorite of a lot of Hammer fans and 50s British sci-fi fans. 60s British sci-fi fans, and a pretty big influence on the movie Life Force, which I think would, if it hasn't played at a Horathon, would kill at a Horathon.
Really? I didn't think of that connection. That's a good connection.
Minus all the boobs.
Oh yeah, the one thing this movie lacks is a female who's naked for the duration, just walking around.
Well, you know, when you say hammer, that's the first thing
That's
that I
true.
think about. And I was like, wow, there's no nightgowns in this movie.
No. That female lead, she was beautiful though. That female lead she was very, very pretty.
Oh, yeah.
And Sandy and I did agree with that one.
Yeah, I kept whispering to Beth, look at that outfit.
We just want the outfits.
The prints for just about everything looked really good throughout the entire show.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two were a little faded, but there was nothing that was really, well, maybe one movie was kind of washed out and a little bit red, but the rest looked really vibrant.
Nothing took me out of it on a presentation level.
So movie 6, again, they might as well just tell you the title right in this question. It's so obvious. Zombie movie favorite.
I mean, that's a pretty wide open.
A beautiful young girl is trapped by the evil forces. No one is safe from their curse.
So a lot of people were like, oh, it's Dawn of the Dead, or it's going to be Fulci's Zombie, or what. And it was none of those. It was a Spanish zombie film from the early 70s that I had seen. Years ago, Anchor Bay put out a box set of this whole series of films, and they're very atmospheric. We actually played this movie under a ridiculously alternate title and version several years ago as part of a Planet of the Apes show that we did with Exhumed. And that's insane. That story is insane. That basically, I can say it because we're not giving what this movie weighs. There's this movie entitled Revenge of Planet Ape, something words to that effect, where the distributor, because the Planet of the Apes movies were successful, took this Spanish zombie movie and cut in a prologue that basically says,
legend has it, almost 3,000 years ago, a simian civilization of super intelligent apes struggled with man to gain control of this planet. In the end, man conquered ape after a brutal battle, which saw him destroy the ape, his culture and society. After this battle, man tortured and killed all the ape prisoners by piercing their eyes with a red-hot poker. One of the prisoners, who was also the leader of the apes, vowed they would return from the dead to avenge man's brutality at a point in time before man destroyed Earth himself. That time is now.
and then this movie just plays in full. Like
a zombie ape movie. That was a trip, man.
So while I was watching this, I'm like, they kind of do look like decayed monkeys on horseback.
Yeah, but think about it. This ties in with the movie before that we were just talking about, because didn't they find the skeleton of a monkey that movie?
We could find a through line there for sure.
And I believe this is where we went to dinner, wasn't it?
Yes, as much as we do love this movie, it's one of those things that you just have to make a choice. At this point, it was, I think, like 9:15 when the movie was starting, and we knew it was going to be ending by 11. We wanted to make sure that we could get something, some sort of substance in our bellies, you know.
And that's the worry too about Horathon. When it was held at the iHouse in Philly, there was a Wawa across the street that was 24 hours. So you could always get convenience store food or sandwiches. But in Phoenixville, everything closes after a certain hour. And that hour is not terribly late. So you do kind of have to, somewhere around that 9 to 10 o'clock hour, make a decision if you want to get a full sit down meal in you or not. And we ran out, I don't remember during what movie. I think it was actually a later movie after this that we ran out and we got pizza up the street that was actually quite good. So where did you guys wind up going?
It was the pub next door, wasn't it? I don't know what the name of it was.
Little like Irish pub. They had really, really good burgers. I got myself a blob burger. Could not resist. I do love a town that really just like embraces the town, you know? So couldn't pass it up. It was a burger with an egg, a fried egg on it, and it was delicious.
So was I the only one who watched this movie?
Of the Mahoning crew, I think you might have been.
I watched it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I remember it being a little bit different than it is. It can be viewed as a bit ridiculous and slow at times, but overall, I like the vibe of those creatures. They're weird and kind of nightmarish.
We timed it pretty well so that we got back to the last 15, 20 minutes and got to see the end. So I feel like we did get a taste of what the zombies were doing and how they behaved.
I think you probably got the majority of the action in the movie when you came back.
Oh, maybe.
That was a crowd pleaser, always is a crowd pleaser. And that rolls us into movie number 7. And at this point, it's 11 o'clock. Movies starting at 11. This was a short one, though.
Old school unofficial sequel to one of the original Hollywood horror blockbusters.
This had us racking our brains. We were in the actual restaurant and tossing out titles like, what could it be? We're Googling stuff like, what could it be?
Night, I will take Nikki away. Her soul will wander through the night, and you will never find where her body rests.
And then right before it started, I was seeing a lot of trailers with Karloff in it, and I'm like, ooh, maybe it's Frankenstein 1970.
I thought they were going to go with something it off the Universal path, but hitting that vein,
Somebody guessed it right, though, at dinner, didn't they? Was it Jeffrey C. who got the title right?
Probably.
It might have been Jeffrey C.
I just think about anybody who can get these right. You have to have a really deep film knowledge, because everything my friends and I were guessing, or the people sitting around me, it was all kind of obvious, well-known stuff. And that's really kind of not what Harry plays for the most part. So hats off to people who can get these things right, even if you just...
That's the thing. And I mean, spoiler alert, our buddy Mikey Gingold won the Guess the Film contest. And Mikey's film critic, he worked for Fangoria for years, up and down knowledge of horror. And that's kind of what you need if you expect to win something like this, because that was such a fun aspect to it. And something that Exhumed does so well is, kind of get the crowd involved without being rowdy, I
mean, after a certain hour, there's no rowdy to be had. The only fight anybody has in them is to stay awake.
Yeah, we all became zombies after a certain hour. And, of course, daylight saving time working into things. So at a certain point, you're like, all right, we're pushing through. And you're like, wait, how did it become 1 o'clock again?
Film 7 was from 1943 and is an unofficial sequel to a Universal Monster movie. Features Bela Lugosi and easily like the most eloquent werewolf I've ever seen. Like, you see this character as a werewolf and as the untransformed man, and the only difference is that it looks like he needs to shave really badly.
Yeah.
I had never seen this one. I don't think I had ever even heard of this one before, and I was really impressed by the level of special effects in it. Also movie number 9, but we're on number 7. I was really pleased with this one. As far as overall experience of the day, it might have been my favorite just for how rare it is to see this movie on film, I expect. It's definitely one of the deeper cuts.
Oh, yeah.
Is my impression, and one I'm going to try to obtain in the best possible physical format for my home collection.
It was a Columbia release, and I feel like the print we saw had a much more recent Columbia logo at the front. So this might have been like an 80s or even a 90s print that they struck, which is surprising to me for a title this obscure. And it's a fun Universal style monster movie. It moves right along. It's got, multiple monsters in it. The effects, as you say, are quite good. And it just feels like a good kind of bubblegum Saturday matinee monster movie for the youths. And it was really, really cool to have the opportunity to see this.
Great performance by Bella, too. Any chance to see Bella up on the big screen. And that rolls us into film number 8, which this is the one that I think a lot of people were blown away by.
I think this is the film that will be the cornerstone of this podcast. The Clue, movie number 8, sleazy, absolutely bonkers Italian horror ripoff. Oh, the one Italian horror ripoff that exists. So this was an original Italian language print from late. No subtitles, no English dubbing. Our friend Ian Zipczynski had translated or acquired subtitles and was basically doing live subtitling or cueing the subtitles live as the movie played with a little video projector that projected across the very, very bottom of the screen. Smaller subtitles than they would have liked. I think they initially wanted to use the DCP in the main booth to do this, but it didn't quite work out that way. So they were like these little yellow subtitles across the bottom. So yeah, this is a sequel, unofficial, illegal sequel to a 70s Australian horror movie that was very, very popular in its day, that had its own Australian sequel. But this Italian sequel was like a sleazy, softcore, gore, bonkers movie that's like, it went somewhere nobody thought it was going to go, and then it kept going, and then it went even farther. This is the movie I think we all talked about as being the most memorable of the day.
Oh my gosh, can I just start? I just want you to know, like 3 people texted me at the end. I looked down at my phone and people were like, "Are you okay?"
I did think about you actually while watching the movie. Just thinking, oh, how is Sandy reacting to this?
And then the one scene that I can't stop telling people about, of course I choose my audience wisely, was the one lady death scene. We'll just put it that way.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm just like, everybody that I talk to about that, I'm like, and then.
Just when you think things can't get any crazier. Yeah, Harry had an amazing quote, which let me pull it from the Exhumed page because it was too perfect. It kind of summed up the entire event for a lot of people. He says, "Some movies are not for everyone. This movie is not for anyone."
That's funny.
And boy, oh boy. I mean, that's what it's all about, though, is like, that really pushes the limits for a lot of a traditional audience. And this is almost exactly what the Exhumed 24-hour crowd was hoping for. Something that was just going to literally turn their heads and turn them in their seats, I
mean, it was ridiculous with ridiculous, silly, laughable dialogue and just gratuitous nudity. And I mean, basically everything you want in an R-rated movie. But then there's this female death scene that is, it is a murder in the most gruesome way, but it was more explicit than I imagined. Like I thought, oh, they're going to sort of dance around this. And it's like, no, they're going to show you something that, wow.
Yeah, full view.
Was it rated R or was it rated X is all I really want to know.
Oh boy, I don't know that it was ever released here in English. But I would have to say it would be an X for that.
I mean, yeah, like I was like, I can't believe. I just kept sitting there going, I can't believe it.
A movie that pushes the envelope. Yeah, that's what I say about the horror experience now, which we've talked about on the podcast. Going into a new quote unquote horror movie is, I just want to see some craziness, some brutal kills, and I'll get my money's worth. Holy shit, this one delivers.
And this is apparently available on Blu-ray from Severin Films, uncut. So if anybody wants to experience again at home,
hell yeah,
or find out what we're talking about, you can get this.
And I think it was the right time of day.
Yeah, midnight movie all day.
We were all pretty delusional by that point, and we were like, "Are we really watching this right now? Is this really going on?"
I really honestly thought it was probably the most fun of all of the movies that we saw. Because I didn't know, again, I never saw it before. And I thought that the mystery of it was interesting and it was comical when it probably wasn't supposed to be comical. And I thought it was just really a lot of fun. I genuinely enjoyed it, but it's odd. It's a very odd movie. And let me tell you, I'm sure I will still be telling the story and then.
You're making me jealous for missing this one. I had to help deal with some of those rowdy audience members, so I missed the beginning of the movie and decided to just use the time to rest instead, but I can't wait to see it based on your descriptions. It looks like it wasn't released in the States. I can't find anything about an MPAA rating, and that would explain why it wasn't a print with English subtitles available. And I would like to mention, Ian put a lot of effort into getting those subtitles as good as they possibly could be. He was there the same time I was the day beforehand in the projection booth working with their equipment to make sure things were compatible. So if there was a way to do it, he would have found it. And I'm just glad that they were able to find another way to get those subtitles on the screen so that you could all see that movie from a 35 print instead of just playing the frickin' Blu-ray.
And we actually dipped our toes in that water with, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, The Last Shark?
It was The Last Shark, and I think it was also Yeti Giant of the 20th Century.
Yes!
That was the same thing. That was utilizing our digital booth with Ian's subtitles to project over a 35 print from Italy that was just in Italian.
Talk about pushing the boundary. Like you said, Robert, is being 35 millimeter purists, it's in this situation, you have literally a print that you can't get your hands on with English language. So the idea of still playing the movie and going through and translating and lining up the subtitles and having somebody there running the subtitles while somebody's running the 35, it's very cool. And I love the idea of them making this screening happen for all of us by doing that. The subtitles were smaller, and when we say smaller, like the text was actually smaller, but I think that's just because the digital projector they had to be that close to the screen, just because it's an open audience situation. There's not really many options.
But I think certain scenes, even without the translation, they make perfect sense, like the one we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah. Now, in the schedule, the next movie says it started at 1:55 and ends at 2:10. Now, obviously, this isn't a 15-minute movie. That's when we hit our daylight savings time. But why don't we jump into movie number 9?
Movie number 9, the clue is Smart Supernatural Sleeper, that is one of the many movies referenced in the opening song from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
It has been written since the beginning of time that evil, supernatural creatures exist in a world of darkness. And it is also said, man can call forth these powers of darkness.
So I know that song, I know Rocky Horror, and I kept going over and over in my head, and like, none of that really makes sense. And I'll say, it's the one part of the song that I always thought was just a crude joke and not referring to a movie. And it's the line, Dana Andrews said prunes gave him the runes. And that's actually referring to the movie. This is the movie that caused the show to run over schedule because they thought they were getting the US cut and they actually got the UK cut that's 20 minutes longer. It's a black and white supernatural horror thriller with really cool effects and a really cool monster that I still thought was kind of creepy. And it's a little Muppety, but I also thought in a big old theater that would have played this movie back then, it worked really well. And again, that a little bit slower paced, black and white, British, kind of a quiet movie for the most part. It worked great at 2 or 3 a.m. in a big, sort of starting to empty theater.
Yeah, going into this, I was telling everybody, I'm looking forward to that moment of delusion where I can't really tell.
Yeah.
Am I in a theater? Am I in a dream? I don't know what's happening.
You sent me a text after the last movie saying that you were starting to get delusional.
And it was true. That's really what I was looking forward to, is just the perfect kind of combination of tired, little crazy, little full on food, little sugared up. And it certainly happened right around this movie. Now, for me, this one was, it was a little bit slower. It's something that, like, this time of night, I was hoping that he was going to bring out something blockbuster to kind of give everybody a big boost. For me, this wasn't my favorite, but how did you guys feel about it?
I think that monster was really cool. Like when you saw it, it was a little slow. I don't know what it was about it, but it reminded me almost of like a Twilight Zone episode. I don't know what it was. I think especially at the end.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the producer did a ton of TV. It definitely had kind of that TV movie feel to it, but a lot of the movies back in that time kind of had that subpar acting, I guess, or kind of cheesed out acting. But like I said, it hit a note that we hadn't hit throughout the night. Harry was really good about making sure he kind of ticked all these notes, these bars.
My Blu-ray of this movie has 3 cuts of it, and this is one I had never.
What are the 3?
Well, I believe there's the American cut, the UK cut that we watched. I had never seen any version of this movie, and I believe that the 3rd cut is kind of a pre-release version of the movie. But again, don't quote me on that. But I'd always wanted to see this movie since I heard of it. It's very renowned. It's one of my favorite directors, and I've never disliked anything he's made that I've seen. And this is just the perfect venue to see it for the first time. So now I'm really excited to go and watch the other versions and see, what an American producer would take out that we saw to maybe tighten up the pacing a little bit. Because I would say that it was a little slow. I don't mean that as a bad thing necessarily, though. And in those wee hours of the morning, that can get, particularly challenging. It was also a weird moment for me because I was aware that this was the last movie I would be watching. After this, I had to go upstairs to the projection booth and get to work. And the last half of that 24 hours went a whole lot faster than the first half, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. And I think this was the time that Daryl got up and rolled, and he said, I'm going to stay for the first appearance of the monster, and then I'm going to roll. And that's right around, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the time that me and fans started dipping. It just started getting hard, you know? We popped out in the lobby at a certain point, and we were kind of walking the streets, which is another fun thing to mention. They were having some sort of a vendors out on the streets thing during the day, during the weekend, and the whole street was closed off. So when you went outside, you could literally just wander around in the road, which was really fun. You felt like you had the whole block shut off for you or something. But that's when we started getting really, really tired. The sugar wasn't working anymore. And I think after this movie is when we decided to head back to the hotel for a couple hours.
Yeah, I want to say you guys left about halfway through, and then Jeff and I left. We watched the end of this movie, and then we left after that.
I was going to mention that I believe historically Phoenixville would close the blocks around the Colonial Theater during Blobfest in order to allow for vendors and food trucks and people to just, commingle in the streets. But when COVID started, they would do that for the sake of the many, many restaurants up and down that street to have outdoor seating. And I hope that they keep doing that on weekends, even post-COVID, because it's so nice to be able to just roam around and not worry about traffic. It's very European, and I'm hoping to spend a lot of time there in the off season.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful area. I can say the town, I had this quote, this town gets drunk at night. I'm pretty sure it must be a college town or something, but just the fact that there's so many bars congested right along that roadway, maybe we just didn't get lucky every time we stepped out for a smoke. But it was, it was a scene. It was wild.
Film number 10's clue was rarely seen satire of homage to 1950s era sci-fi horror movies. This was the one movie I really didn't like. This is a movie. It was made in released in 1977. It was produced by a guy written by a guy who would go on with his wife to do some really huge sitcoms in the 80s and 90s. This is an early effort for him.
Yes, this is what I was thinking with the other one.
Yeah, the best thing about this is that it's got George Gobel in it. It's trying to be really funny, but I just didn't find it funny at all. And I always say there's nothing worse than a comedy that's not funny because you can't even laugh at it. There's just nowhere to go. Yeah. So at that point, I mean, I like the era. I like 70s stuff in general. And it was very, very clearly, slightly trying to look like the 50s, but everybody had 70s hair. And this is where I chose partway through to just lean my head back and see where sleep would take me.
Yeah. I had seen this film before. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Rita Wilson in this movie Tom Hanks' wife?
Yes, it was one of her earliest roles, I guess.
Yes. But yeah, it's, kind of in that same vein. Like, this would have been the time to pull out a big gun, just to be like, oh, I am not leaving. I am not doing it. And I think it was the perfect choice for a lot of people to catch some Z's during movie 10. At that point, movie 10, it was also pushing 4 a.m. when that movie ended.
Was anybody else there for this movie, or had everybody kind of checked out? Sandy, were you conscious through this film?
I was there for everything other than going to eat.
Okay.
The only time that I took a break, I'll tell you when we get to that one, I took a little 45-minute nap. And apparently I snored, as everybody likes to tell me now. But
it happened.
That was you?
It happened.
I did hear somebody at 1 or 2 points snoring during a movie, but I doubt it was from that far away.
But no, I watched this one. But the one thing I would say before we move on is that I thought that it might have been picked because I thought several of the scenes were like an homage to The Blob.
Right.
Like where Steve McQueen would go in the police station and say, one more time, you gotta help me. And that scene was in there, and I thought maybe that was why Harry had picked it.
I mean, I appreciate it screening just for the fact that it's a very rare film. Like, I think it only ever had a videotape release in this country after it played in theaters, and I'd never heard of it. So, like, I was excited to see something I'd never heard of. I just personally wasn't.
I hadn't heard of it myself. It looked fun from what I saw in the projection booth. I found it on YouTube. There's a channel I really like that I feel like plugging called White Slaves of Chinatown. They share a lot of really, really rare titles. I don't know how they get their hands on some of them, but if you want to check out some weird, cool, random movie shit, White Slaves of Chinatown on YouTube, go for it.
YouTube's a great underused and underloved resource for films.
Well, it's so funny. I used to haunt these torrent sites that trafficked in really rare stuff from cable broadcasts and videotapes and foreign discs and all that. And now all that stuff's just on YouTube. It's like so much easier and better to find these.
Yeah. It's just there. It's
out of copyright stuff.
For most people, they don't think about it as, kind of a traditional streaming platform. But, if you treat it like you do your Hulu or whatever else, you can find some gems. I've been digging through some PD titles in the off season, and the amount of public domain goodness out there, it's like, psh, forget it. And that takes us to 4 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. when I'm sure everybody is just insane. And that's movie number 11.
Around this time, I was wondering going into this, at what point are there going to be very few people sitting around me? And really, the density of the crowd didn't change very much. A few people would leave and a few people would come back. And I think they were sort of replacing each other. So like my friends who were sitting behind me, I'd turn around and one person wouldn't be there, but the other one would. Right. So it was never really an empty theater. It just got, really quiet. The clue for movie 11, low budget Lovecraftian lunacy.
There are places where nothing ever seems to change. But here, nothing is what it seems.
So I thought it was going to be something like Demons of Ludlow or some really obscure thing. Right. It was actually a movie I'd heard of that I remember seeing advertised on TV and its sequel. And I remember seeing the video tapes in the video store. This, again, the cool thing about these shows, this was an alternate title for this film. Everybody knows this movie under one title, but the title on this print was The Farm, and it starred Will Wheaton and Claude Akins. And it was a movie. This was the one where it came up, and I was like, I think this is one I'm just going to full on sleep through, because it's a movie I'd seen before, wasn't a huge fan of, and I knew I was starting to really need at least an hour of sleep to keep going. So I really only saw the first few minutes until slumber took me over.
Yeah, VHS gem, definitely in that VHS era. And even, after the fact, going through the lineup, it's a really fun choice. I love the idea of the alternative title. But it's one that I remember seeing, and, the fun Will Wheaton performance, things like that. But gosh, I'd love to say the other title. But if you guys have a chance, if you haven't seen this movie, it's definitely worth seeing. Sandy, were you conscious during this one?
I totally watched this one. I watched them all, except for the one that I slept through half of. I genuinely enjoyed this. And again, remember, other than the first one, I had never seen any of the movies. So to me, I was intrigued because immediately this reminded me of my very favorite television show, The X-Files. That's what it felt like to me. The way it was set up, the way it was paced, the way, the character development happened. I enjoyed it, but I agree that I don't know that I necessarily would have thought of it as a big budget movie, but like as a TV movie or as like a long episode of a TV show, I thought it was enjoyable.
Yeah, super fun. Movie number 12, as we roll into 5:30 a.m.
This is one I wanted to make sure I didn't miss because I'm a big fan of Hong Kong movies. And this was, as I said earlier, last time we did a horror-thon, I took a break but made sure I set my alarm so I could get back for the Hong Kong movie. And it was preceded by insane, hilarious Hong Kong movie trailers. And the clue here for movie 12 is Crazy Hong Kong Horror Fantasy Fun. It's a movie I'd never heard of, and I was big into Hong Kong movies in the 90s and beyond. And it stars Yuen Biao. Jackie Chan went to Peking Opera School with a few other guys who were like his really close friends as kids. And this guy was one of those. So they made a lot of movies together, and he's a really great martial artist who never really did anything that people in this country would have seen like on an American screen. But it was weird to see this. The basic storyline is like men at night with machine guns. And there's this giant like sculpture or vase or something, and it explodes, and a woman shoots up out of it and says the Hell Virgin is going to come and kill everybody, and this is what she looks like, and they go away. So basically, Yuen Biao is sort of like a spiritual martial arts wizard or something, and he and another guy from another disciple temple, whatever, are trying to find this evil supernatural lady and vanquish her. And it's surprisingly almost little to no martial arts in a movie that stars a well-known martial artist. It's a lot of like crazy special effects and exploding things and people's hair flying around and shooting energies out of their palms. And I couldn't tell you necessarily really what the plot was, but I had a great time with it.
This is the one out of all the ones I couldn't properly watch that I was most upset about missing. It has this everything in the kitchen sink kind of a vibe to it that I really enjoy about a lot of movies from that part of the world. So I've hunted down the Blu-ray and I'll be watching it as soon as I can.
It's just, I was just surprised. It's not that there's a Hong Kong movie I've never heard of, but just one with an actor I know so well that I'd never heard of. But that was the case with last year too. It was, to me, a pretty obscure movie, but just totally bonkers and exactly what you need at 5 to 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. It was like the visual version of the cinematic equivalent of a bowl of Fruit Loops for your brain in the morning. It just was like, what am I looking at? And God help anybody who woke up in the middle of this movie and tried to make sense of it. Actually, Val had come back from a break and she sat down and I leaned over to her and I said, whatever you see from here to the end will make as much sense as if I told you about what you
That does sound like a great kind of movie to wake up during. And speaking of Fruit Loops, wasn't the cereal bar immediately after this movie?
It was. Yep. They did a breakfast break and a classic TV show on 35.
Which was very cool to run. I bet that's part of that recent haul that Harry got that included that episode of The Monkees that we played at the drive-in that I know was maybe the best thing we played all year as far as you're concerned, Mark.
That was a beyond delightful for me. To see a TV show from the 60s on 35 millimeter, it always blows my mind because you think, why would it be on film? That film is for theaters, not for TV. Well, it's a great storage medium, and we just watched one from the early 60s and it looked great. So obviously the stuff maintains. It was a black and white episode of a classic 60s horror themed TV show, comedy sitcom, and it had the original commercials in it. So it had the brought to you by, and then you'd see a commercial or two. One commercial was in color, which I was surprised by, making me think maybe this might have been a later rerun where they were cutting the color commercials into it for broadcast. But most people treated it as a break. So it was a lot of people hanging out and chatting and getting their free cereal from the free cereal bar that was provided to them and sort of, charging up for the final run of movies. But I just sat there the whole time enjoying this vintage TV episode with a cameo by one of the Inhuman stars of Forbidden Planet. And it was a really cool thing to do. It gave you a longer break than the usual 2 or 3 trailers if you did want to run out. You knew you were going to have about a half hour to kill. And it was really cool to see that. Who was at this point, let's regather, who was still on premises and awake? Was Virgil, Nancy, Beth, and Jeff still gone at this point?
Yes, we ended up coming back around 8 a.m., something like that.
We came in, I want to say, at the end of movie 13.
Correct.
I want to say maybe about 10, 15 minutes before it ended.
And did you go back to a local hotel or your house, or did you sleep in a car?
No, we had a hotel room. So we crashed at the hotel room. I want to say probably maybe 5 hours, 4.5 hours, somewhere in there. Wow. Yeah.
So you're probably relatively fresh when you came back.
We definitely needed it. Oh no, I wasn't fresh at all. Well, I was fresh, but not.
I think everybody wasn't fresh until Monday.
But no, it was definitely much needed. Jeff was dying in those seats, so it was definitely time for us to roll out so he could stretch out and get some sleep. He's not used to those hours like I'm used to those hours working at the drive-in, so it's a little tough for him sometimes. So.
I told Nance, I was like, we are not in high school anymore. The idea of pulling a 24-hour all-nighter, I knew at a certain point for sure we were going to at least start to putter out. Whether we were going to go back to the hotel or sleep there would have been seen. But there is a thing with this horror-thon, and it's not a bad thing at all. But people have bragging rights. If you can survive this thing, you can brag about it for a whole year. And
I think for our first time, a lot of us did really well.
Hell yeah.
We did really, really well.
Yeah. But for me going into it, I might even said it to Mom and Beth at a certain point. I was like, I am not worried about, ego when it comes to this thing. It's like, I want to be safe and not pass out in my chair, literally.
I think Daryl said it too. Daryl's like, I'm not here to prove anything. Guess what? If that means that I need to skip a movie here and there and I need to take a break, a half an hour, get some sleep, come back so I can see the movies that I want to see or I think I want to see, he's like, I'm fine with that.
That's
so I kind of went off him,
Yeah.
For those who want to try to make the full 24 hours, my recommendation is, at least what worked for me this year, was plenty of hydration. Granted, you don't want to hydrate so much that you have to run to the bathroom that often. It's a tricky, line to walk. But I deliberately abstained from sugar or caffeine until around 10:30 p.m. And then I started ramping up with those little bits of, energy supplement. And by the time I was in the projection booth, I was popping some ginseng every now and then to try and keep that plane going. And it was hard. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy under any circumstance, but it was a lot easier than it had been the previous 2 years. And I was even able to stay awake for another 4 or 5 hours after the job was done. We all went out to Molly's down the street, and I was able to even stay awake for another hour or two after that. Then I slept for 12 hours.
Then hibernation.
I just say, I think Sandy and I were very excited when we found out that the Colonial serves beer and wine. So when we got there at around 10 o'clock in the morning, I was having my first beer on Saturday. So I was a happy person.
Hell
That was
yes.
fun. That was super fun.
It was.
Well, and my answer to, the marathon idea is I'm like, between working at the drive-in and my sleep schedule being weird from that. I mean, I just tell everybody I'm a teacher. Like, I'm used to 2 to 3 hours a night if I have to have it because I'm a teacher. So that the 45 minutes of snoring that I got in was totally, I was good for the rest of the day. I went to sleep at a normal time the following night. Like, I literally stayed up until like 10:30.
That's awesome. Well, after the breakfast bar and classic TV show projected on 35, we rolled into movie number 13.
And this was somewhere around 9:20, keeping in mind that the schedule was kicked out a little bit because of the length of the longer version of that Dana Andrews films. Movie number 13's clue was vintage supernatural anthology featuring 2 bona fide masters of horror.
Horrors the screen has never before dared to depict. The terrifying horror of man killing Vine with a human brain that creeps and kills. The terrifying horror of the dead, entombed for 200 years, that creeps its way back to terrorize the living.
Now, I thought he was going to go super obscure, so I was thinking this movie called Gallery of Horrors that has John Carradine and Lon Chaney Jr. in it, which I've actually never seen. But this is actually one I have seen. This is one that I had on tape back from like the Nostalgia Merchant or somebody put this out on tape. So I had an old cruddy, smeary pan and scan copy of this. This was a gorgeous Technicolor widescreen print. We can say the cast. You have Peter Cushing, you have Christopher Lee, you have Donald Sutherland. It's, I think, the first Amicus anthology horror film. Amicus being a British studio that was known for their anthology movies. They did Asylum and Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and House That Dripped Blood and all kinds of stuff like that, right up through to Monster Club. And so I basically named every anthology they made except the one we're talking about right now. So figure that out. But I love anthology movies. So I really had a good time seeing this for the first time on the big screen.
If anybody knows me, they know that I have this weird, I don't know what I'd say. There's a pocket of time where I say Donald Sutherland was like it, because I mean, it's a weird thing to say, but go with me here. Like Klute and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I think are fantastic films. And he really is a charismatic leading man in those movies. And I don't know if I'd call him hot, mind you, but like he definitely had a thing about him that I really liked. And we were just talking about this at dinner. So then when we come back and now we're all loopy after the little cereal bar and I see him pop up on the screen, I'm like, oh my God, it's Donald Sutherland.
And very early Donald Sutherland. This was 1965. And not without his filmography in front of me, he really became better known with Kelly's Heroes, which was early 70s, and MASH, 1970. So I don't know how much he had really done by 65. He may have just been some young American actor that got to be in this movie, and he might not really have had any name value at that point.
For the record, I would call him hot. That's just an objective fact.
I was going to say the same thing.
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel so much better. Thank you so much. I love him so much.
I could listen to him talk all day long. So
Hell yes.
You know, he told those orange juice commercials, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's him.
I feel so seen right now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a super fun one, and to see those performances, you know, that's the thing I love about when Harry screens some of these older films, is you get to see an era of horror and an era of performance that, you know, we rarely get to kick into. So that was a really, really fun one.
And that film sets the mold for all of the following Amicus anthologies, or just about all of them, where a group of people are together and some person is showing them their future, their potential future, and then in the end they find out they don't really have much in the way of a future.
Yeah.
So at this point, some of us have just watched, in less than a day, 14 movies in a row. 13 movies in a row. Some of us watched an excellent film inside our eyelids for part of that time. New movie 14's clue is intelligent psychological thriller slasher with a fantastic lead performance.
So what do you think? Can we give this little guy a home?
Sure.
That's my girl.
He's a wonderful man.
I was really excited that they were showing this one. I've always liked this one, and I don't know how much this gives away, but I kind of hope that they do a remake at some point, but they make it a gender reversal, and I want the lead to be Britney Spears because I think she could pull it off.
Well, it's funny because
talk about a hook.
We tried to show this movie once, and we were sent the remake instead. And we had one of the stars of the movie there. Was it a Camp Blood that we ran this?
It was
an Exhumed event.
Yes.
And somebody at the studio saw the exact same title as the movie we wanted, but they picked one that was made 20 years later. And my whole thing was, why would you think anybody wants to show that version? And we at this point, Val and I decided we were going to take a break and have a proper breakfast because I was starving and getting a little cranky. And it's a movie we'd both seen a bunch. I'm like, cool, we'll skip this. Ultimately regret that. But as I walked out, Harry was in the lobby and he said, oh, hey, what about this movie? And I'm like, hey, they sent you the right one this time. And we had a little laugh about that. It stars Terry O'Quinn, which a lot of people know now from his role on Lost as John Locke. But most of us first learned about him from this movie, this really popular dark thriller about this guy who's not a nice new daddy.
Also stars a friend of the Mahoning family, Miss Jill Sholin.
And I regret not staying for this because I heard the crowd was way into it and reacting perfectly and exuberantly to the whole film. We came in right toward the end. I would say like the final showdown scene, and the place was going nuts. And I was like, shit, I wish I could have experienced the whole movie if I knew it was going to be like this. But you guys were all back and awake for this. Robin, you were projecting?
I was up in the booth until reel 2 of the last movie. At that point, the manager came back. He had gotten approximately an hour's worth of sleep, and he wanted to jump back in because they kind of couldn't afford to pay me anymore. I was there a lot longer than they expected to be, and I really appreciated the opportunity. It wasn't even about the money, not that I'm complaining, but in a way, I wish I could have either ridden out the rest of the show or left like 30-40 minutes earlier so I could have watched that last movie because I had never seen it before, and it was probably a mid-condition print, if not damn close.
I think this movie number 14 was the one that I noticed a little bit of print damage on, but it didn't matter. Like you said, Mark, the crowd was so into it. People were re-energized, and it was just a home run.
And I think with people who enjoy 35 or are tolerant of 35, print damage doesn't really matter. Print damage matters when you're missing chunks of dialogue or a scene abruptly ends, or as we've experienced in the past, the movie ends a few minutes too early, or if the color is so faded it's distracting. But there was none of that for the duration of these
grainy running lines, things like that.
Doesn't matter. Reminds you of that you're watching a print. Look, everything looked great otherwise.
And I think that it's especially cool and even useful when you're watching really gnarly genre movies and you're up so long that you're starting to break down at a psychological level. The way that an Exhumed show will go back and forth between prints that are just immaculate and then something that has all sorts of green emulsion scratches or some other kind of damage. And I think that that's just part of the fun. And these big programs really bring out the diversity of experiences you get. And then that goes even further into the genre. You can get all sorts of cross-pollination between the movies. Like you mentioned something earlier about there were monkeys in the one movie, and then there was that connection with Revenge of Planet Ape. And I think I counted at least 4 movies from that marathon that had people jumping out of windows. It's a really cool way to experience the genre in such a concentrated form.
And I think, at this point, everybody felt like they had survived something really epic, and we did. The experience that Harry and the Exhumed guys gave us, it really went around the clock, and it had so many different aspects of horror. You can see why this event is coveted, and why people love this event so much, and why it's a communal experience and all of that. And I kept saying to people, it's almost like an Exhumed show that just doesn't stop. At the Mahoning, that is. That just doesn't stop, and it goes and goes and goes and goes. It was a lot of fun. And at this point, the Exhumed guys took the stage, and they started in with the Guess the Movie's prize giveaway, which, Mark, I'll let you go into how that unfolded.
So they tabulated. Dan explained how he does it. You get X number of points if you get the correct film for a clue. You get fewer points, but you get points if you put a film they did wind up showing under the wrong clue. So they tabulated that, and I think they had 4 winners. And each of them got, again, these really cool signed limited edition posters, original art posters and things. And we or the group knows 2 top winners. The first runner-up was Webb Wilcoxon, who's a guy who's coming out to our shows for years and going to Exhumed shows for years. And he recently moved to England. Like over the summer, he moved to England. And I think it was during VHS Fest, he stopped by and he donated a bunch of Blu-rays or DVDs and VHS this or last year before, like he was leaving the next day. And a bunch of us were hanging out on Friday in the hotel lobby, and he just walks in and we were like, what? He flew back from England, first time back in the US since he moved away, because he didn't want to miss an Exhumed 24-hour show, because he was part of the regulars who does that.
Awesome.
So he won. He was first runner-up. Mike Gingold was number 1, guessing the most. They won cool stuff. And also they announced Exhumed. If you come to Mahoning shows, Exhumed always does really cool raffles at their table to benefit the space, which is this impending movie theater, video store, arcade they're building near Philly, to be an archive for all of their film prints, but also a place where they can have screenings. And they had, I think what they said was they had made the most money ever on a raffle with this raffle to benefit this thing. And it was just this insane raffle. So they called that off. Thanked everybody for coming out, announced the next show that they're doing, which I believe is already sold out. And then they roll the last movie. So I guess that's how they usually do it, is they say goodbye before the last movie is over. The clue for movie number 15 is enjoyable big budget horror comedy directed by a genre icon.
There has been a destructive force unleashed on this town such as I have never seen.
Oh my God, I don't believe this is not happening!
We have got a poltergeist!
This is the one that I guessed correctly.
Really?
I mean, it was a guess, but I did get it right.
Yeah. People were all over the map with this one.
I saw this in the theater when it came out, and I liked it. I saw it on Laserdisc. A friend of mine bought it on Laserdisc. It was kind of a big deal because at the college I went to in the 90s, mid-ish 90s, this director had a connection at the college. He wasn't known here at the time, and he had made these really weird movies. We're going to talk all around this. He made these really weird, gory, goofy, gloppy movies in New Zealand that had kind of come out on video, but not really. And we got to see them in a theater. So we knew who this guy was. So when this movie came out with a big name lead actor and from Universal, a lot of us were excited to see what this guy could do. This guy has since gone on. It's funny because they say genre icon. He's more of an icon for doing fantasy films than horror at this point, even though he started in horror. And I think it was a good one to end it with. Not everybody liked this movie, but it was a good, big budget, Hollywood style, effects heavy movie that featured Dee Wallace, who many of us had just spent the previous weekend with.
In a killer performance.
Yeah, literally.
She's the best.
I was really excited for this one.
Had you seen it? Had anybody else seen this before?
Yeah, Jeff and I have seen it, and we actually really, really enjoy it. So when the opening credits kind of started coming up, I looked at him and I named it. And Sandy goes, "What is it?" And I named it to her, and she goes, "I've never seen this one before." And I said, "Are you serious?"
Yeah, really fun movie. I think I saw this in the theaters when it came out, and certainly an iconic director. But the performance for me comes from Jeffrey Combs, not to give away the movie at all.
My body is a roadmap of pain.
Yes, who we all know from Reanimator. But yeah, super fun performance. I think totally overlooked performance. But all I'll say about this movie, as much as I do love it, it reminds me, it has the Hollow Man effect, I say, where the movie's awesome, has an amazing cast, everything going for it. The effects just aren't there. Just right behind the ball, where if this movie would have gotten made even 5 years later, it would have seriously benefited.
The problem with cutting edge effects is that they're only going to be cutting edge for so long.
So long, yeah.
And they were very cutting edge in their day, but now they do look a little cartoony. They do take you out of it a little bit, but it's really wild and inventive and all over the place visually in a good way that it took me out of it a little bit, but I still had fun with it.
Yeah, the comedy horror mixture is this director's tones was all over this movie.
It changes tone as the movie goes on, something like that. And I totally agreed with it because I felt like the characters were well developed and you cared about them, and there was all seriousness to it at the same time. So I did enjoy it for a first time watch, and I was surprised that no one had ever said you really would like this. I enjoyed it. I don't know that I'd say it was something I want to watch over and over, but I genuinely enjoyed it, especially as like the last movie. I thought it was lighthearted and enjoyable as the final movie of the marathon.
It was like a pick-me-up at the end, you know? It was something a little bit fun.
Yes.
It wasn't something super slow. You know, it was just a fun movie to see at the end.
I agree.
Absolutely.
I agree.
And I wonder if he didn't play it because Dee Wallace. I'm just he's like, I got Dee Wallace at the Mahoning, and guess what? I got to play this movie here because Dee Wallace.
She was so awesome in it. I turned both, I think, to Beth and Sandy at a certain point. I was like, we hung out with her last week.
I know, it's just amazing. And it's funny because a lot of the stories that she chatted with me about while we were sitting at the table were about this movie. And at the time, I just listened to the stories and didn't think about it beyond that. But as I'm watching scenes that she had talked about, because she had her kids on the set or what she was dealing with in her personal life, they brought all of that into focus, that like how meaningful those stories were. So it was a once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah, super fun. And Robert, you projected half of this movie, right?
Just the first reel and a few minutes. I was out of the booth before the second changeover, which was to my disappointment. But at that point, I was quite tired, and it was probably for the best that I could just kind of decompress and gather my senses and make the many trips out to my car to take all my stuff out of the projection booth area in order to be ready for when all of you got out back to the real world.
So things wrap up. We had an amazing time. We kind of conversed, I guess, outside of the theater. I made it a point to try to find Harry and could not find him anywhere. But when I went back in the theater, the staff was cleaning up, sweeping up the theater. And I just gave them all a big thank you and got some hugs from the regular folks that come out and support us at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. And that was my big takeaway. The amount of people that stopped us and gave us love and let us know how much they appreciate what we do. It was incredible. Even people outside of the event, we would be walking in the hoodies and, you know, somebody would stop us on the street. Hey, you're that guy. And I'm just like, this is just, it's a true extension of the community. And I guess that's the case with anything that Exhumed does, because the Exhumed fans are the Mahoning fans.
And it was very cool of Dan to give us a shout out in his opening comments.
Oh, that was the coolest. Yeah. So Harry had a ton of extra t-shirts, event t-shirts from the 2021 season. And they came up with the really fun idea of breaking out a t-shirt launcher and blasting some Mahoning event t-shirts into the crowd. And of course, when he mentioned us, we got a big round of applause, and that always means a lot. But we got a photo outside of the theater a nice group photo.
Thank God the streets were closed. We never would have got a shot wide enough for all the people. We couldn't have done it in the street.
Yeah, we pulled everybody that we knew that was in eyesight. We're like, come on in. But we got a great commemorative photo, and then we headed over for some, gosh, what was it? Breakfast, lunch? I don't even know. What time was it then?
I think it was about 1 by then.
I was going to say it had to have been.
Yeah, because we ran a little after schedule. I think it was supposed to run to about 12:45. But we went and we had an amazing lunch, I guess you'd call it, over at, Molly Maguire's?
Yes, that's where we went.
And we got ourselves a really nice private back room. We walked in, and of course the hostess is like, how many? 17. She gives us a look like, oh God, fuck you guys. But it ended up being really great. They were amazing there. The food was really awesome.
I hope she didn't feel that way at the end. I tipped her 200%.
There you go, baby. We take care of our folks. But yeah, at that point, I was totally burning out, and we had to get back to Virgie. So I think we left, right before the check came. But a hell of an experience. What do you have to say about this whole experience that we went through together?
I loved it. What was everyone's favorite movie? Did you have like a favorite standout?
Oh yeah, number one, I have to say, again, seeing it theatrically, seeing an actual print of said movie, it is oof. I'll never forget it. And seeing it with you guys was even better. My only regret is that Fancy was not there yet, because when I told her what the first movie was, she was so pissed that she missed it.
I'm going to go with the Donald Sutherland movie because, Donald Sutherland.
Hell yeah.
I think for me, it's either the second movie, that French gruesome film, or that insane Italian film, just because it's burned into my brain.
Definitely. That's the second one for me. I'll say that's my second.
How about you, Beth?
I'm going to go movie number 2. I think that sitting next to Virgil and listening to him go, as the movie was going on and that gruesome surgery was happening just made the movie completely. So I'm going to go number 2.
Yeah, there were waves of oohs and ahs during that movie, and I feel like I was responsible for some of them. How about you, Rob, of the ones that you, I guess, got to see?
It's kind of a toss-up between 1, 2, and 9. I'd seen the first 2 before, and I liked everything I saw. One thing I will mention, because it's always a bummer when you miss something at these 24-hour shows, because for the listeners who aren't aware, once Exhumed plays a movie at a 24-hour marathon, they never repeat it. It's a one and done thing. They might play it at another show. You might be able to come see it at a Tunnel Vision Tuesday or at some other event somewhere. But once it plays at a 24-hour show, that's it. They never repeat a movie. And what I realized this year was, while looking through the program, they had listed, I believe on the last page, every movie they've ever played at a 24-hour show alphabetically. And I realized there are some real bangers that they've never played before. Assuming that my memory's correct, they've never played such movies like Halloween or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And if they have, there are other bangers that they haven't played yet. So anytime you go to a 24-hour show, there's going to be at least 1 or 2 massive classic horror movies that you might have seen already, but you've probably never seen with an audience that primed and ready for the experience. And we definitely got that with number 1. In my opinion, number 2 is probably just as great of a film, although I wish we had played the other version of movie number 1, but that was such a good-looking copy of the movie and such a great experience that I don't even feel like complaining. Yeah, it's kind of a toss-up between those 3.
Yeah, so much fun. Again, we were a week away from being out of the season, and it was really great coming back and seeing everybody. And doing it outside of work was such a change of pace, But I said it, hopefully we can make a point to find some really fun screenings, find some really cool 35mm events or events in general, and get together as a group, because it's always a fun time.
As you leave the theater, folks, please be careful. Don't let this happen to your car. Be sure to remove the speaker before you leave. If you should accidentally pull a speaker loose, please turn it in at our snack bar or box office. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank all you guys for joining us on the podcast today, making the time. And we always thank the fans for taking the time to support the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We are going to do an official kind of season wrap-up episode, which you guys can look forward to. And of course, we'll be getting into some of the nuggets of gold that we have coming for the 2022 season. Before we let you guys go, Mark, I know this is not a Patreon episode, but why don't you let the folks know our plans in the off season with the Patreon?
Oh, sure. So Patreon, if you don't know, is a way for people to set up a subscription payment sort of thing to an organization or individual or artist or what have you that they want to support. And we have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Mahoning Drive-In. And there's 3 tiers, 3 different price levels, and you can access different stuff. And it's mostly just unpublished photos, flashbacks to things that played at the theater many, many decades ago, video clips, video shot on site, the video intros that celebrities do when they come, a lot of stuff that you can only see through Patreon. We tip you off to shows ahead of time and things like that. And if you're in the top tier, the Simplex tier, during the season, we do a monthly free screening of something from our vault. And we, much like the Exhumed show we just talked about, we don't tell you what it's going to be. It'll be something, you know, a drive-in kind of movie. And we'll play some trailers and we'll do a DJ set and have food specials. And then something will hit the screen that hopefully we all enjoy. Well, we can't do that when the theater's closed. So what we're going to do, we just tested it out literally like yesterday. If you're in the Simplex tier, you're going to get a free virtual screening once a month, and it will be something rare and drive-in themed and appropriate, either from my archive or we may be pulling from a very well-known archive to show some videos. And it'll be a Zoom thing. So you get a Zoom link, you hop on, and with everybody else, you get to watch something cool that we picked for you and still sort of get together in the virtual realm. It's a way to keep doing these shows that people have been enjoying. It's also a way for people who live farther away, who can never make it out to a Thursday night show, to join in on that fun. So that's all there on Patreon if you want to look at it.
Yeah, if you guys are on the fence, you know, this is the time to jump over to the Patreon. A lot of people asked this weekend when they saw me, hey, how can we support the Mahoning in the off season? Well, this is a great way to not only support us in a financial manner, but to keep the fun going. You know, it's always hard to say goodbye to the ones that we love in the off season, but this is a way to keep your finger on the pulse. And we're going to try to have a lot of fun with it. We're talking about DJ sets before these screenings. We're talking about video intros, after show kind of wrap-ups and comment sections and things like that. So, you know, it's all about the community. If you guys love what we do, the revival of the drive-in culture, what the Mahoning stands for, hop on over to the Patreon and check us out. And be sure to follow us on all the social medias. That's also a great way to stay in the loop with what we're doing. So you get a nice long episode today, baby. And until next time, much love to all of you guys that are here in the room with me, and also all of you guys listening at home. On that note, Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night, and God bless you.